Sam Jones was looking to fight Luis Ortiz, actually, for this date. That didn't materialise. I'm sure, though, Ortiz will be in your plans for this year, obviously, if all goes well this Saturday night.
No, he mentioned Ortiz back in at the press conference to the last fight, but I said there was no way we were going to fight Ortiz. We just were not ready for Ortiz. That's a step that probably in 2 more fights we'll be fighting a guy like Ortiz. Right now is Bermain. Bermain, I think, has the style that I would want for Joe. Not because he got knocked out by Deontay, but he has a style. He has a size that I want for Joe.
You know, people on Joe Joyce's team really need to focus all their efforts and do whatever they've got to do to keep the microphones away from Abel Sanchez. Because the same way that Abel Sanchez was putting his foot in his fucking mouth when it comes to Gennady Golovkin in his career is the same way he's now doing that with Joe Joyce. You know, if the Ortiz fight didn't materialize for one reason or another, that's fine, because that's a hell of a step up in competition for a guy with so few pro fights like Joe Joyce. It's understandable if his handlers wanted to go another way.
It is.
And you can feel how you want to feel about that, but it's understandable.
It's only got 7 fights.
I can see the reasoning, I can see the logic, but when Abel Sanchez goes as far as saying that no, he didn't want that fight,
fuck's sake,
that he was basically against that fight, and that he may be a co-conspirator as to why that fight didn't happen, well, you're not doing Joe Joyce any favors by saying that. You're not doing him any favors. You know, Joe Joyce, the fighter, Joe Joyce himself, probably feels that he's ready for Luis Ortiz, that he's ready to take on a fight like that right now, that that's the kind of fight that gets his juices going, that he knows that he's a bit of a late bloomer, he doesn't have all the time in the world, and he may have to work at an accelerated rate as a result of that. Hence targeting someone as seasoned as Luis Ortiz. Because Luis Ortiz, you know, at minimum you have to say that Luis Ortiz is a good fighter. I talk about it all the time here on the channel, that because Luis Ortiz's name is tied to Deontay Wilder's and Deontay Wilder's name is tied to Anthony Joshua, they're all polarized. So when those names come up in a conversation, you get a lot of passionate responses, passionate reactions. You either love them or you hate them. And Luis Ortiz is all caught up in that. It's for that reason that for some guys, it's hard to really rate Ortiz accurately. Some people want to tell you he hasn't done anything, and some people want to tell you he's the #2 heavyweight in the world. And neither one of those sides of the argument, neither one of those arguments are accurate. At minimum, what you have to say is that Luis Ortiz is one of the more dangerous heavyweights that are out there. Luis Ortiz, at minimum, is a consensus top 10 heavyweight. He's not a scrub. In that way, it's very gutsy of Sam Jones and Joe Joyce to have targeted Luis Ortiz. And me being the even-tempered boxing fan that I am, I can understand if they decided to go the other way. I can even understand if Abel Sanchez is sitting here saying that he doesn't feel that Joe was ready for that fight. I think all of that is okay. But when you go as far as standing in front of a camera and saying it to the interviewer, you're subjecting your fighter that you're training to negative press. You're subjecting him to criticism that now, based on what you're saying, people can turn right the fuck around and say Joe Joyce ducked Luis Ortiz. Even though Joe Joyce is the one that called him out. And the manner in which Abel Sanchez tries to dress up Bermain Stiverne, tries to decorate and put culottes and curtains on him, as if it's not obvious why you rather that Joe fight him instead of Ortiz. You know that, oh, I'm looking at the fights that he wants. Well, when's the last time you want to fight? Since you're looking at those fights, because we've got to look at what happened in recent memory. We don't
talk to him.
Get to pick and choose which events happen as of late. And as of late, there is absolutely nothing that makes Bermain Stiverne seem like a threat, even to Joe Joyce. For Christ's sake, in the rematch with Deontay Wilder, the man barely threw a punch. I mean, did he throw a punch? Because if he did, I didn't see it. The fight didn't last very long, but for the few moments that it was going on, I didn't see Bermain Stiverne throw a punch, dog. So it's pretty obvious as to why you'd be more receptive to a fight with Stiverne than a fight with Ortiz. I guess what took me back about the interview and what Abel Sanchez said is that he must think that the boxing fans are just complete idiots. He must think we're all morons and we're just going to eat up whatever he says with a spoon, because it's pretty obvious why you'd rather fight Bermain Stiverne instead of Luis Ortiz. So just be honest about it. People would respect you for it if you just said, I don't think he's ready for Ortiz. Stiverne seems like a better option. Because Joe doesn't have a lot of fights, because Joe's a late bloomer, he only started off with a couple of fights as a professional, he's only got a handful of fights now, he's not ready for an Ortiz. If you just say that, then people will respect it a little more. But when you try to go as far as decorating Bermain Stavern, when you try to go as far as beating the fans over the head with a hammer as if Bermain Stavern and the reason that you chose him, when you try to beat people over the head and try to insinuate that somehow there's a challenge there, that's when people are going to get upset, because now you're insulting our intelligence. We know why you picked Bermain Stavern, and some of us might even be okay with that. But when you go as far as trying to decorate it, that's where the insult is. That's where it's a slap in the face. And that's where Abel Sanchez is back to his old ways, putting his foot in his mouth during interviews and getting his fighter negative press. Because I'm sure that there are going to be people out there that use this interview and use sound bites from this interview to talk bad about Joe Joyce. And it's going to be Abel Sanchez's fault as a result. The same way that 154 to 168 shit backfired on Gennady Golovkin with some people is the same way that this can backfire with Joe Joyce. Yeah, I just don't get it. You know, it's a common sense argument. You can feel that way behind the scenes. You know, you can feel that way. But you don't go saying that shit to the fucking... You don't go saying that shit in front of cameras. For Christ's sake! In other news, unified lightweight champion Vasyl Lomachenko is going to be taking on his mandatory challenger Anthony Crolla on April 12th in a fight that's going to be streamed on ESPN+. These guys were able to circumvent the purse bid ordered by the WBA by reaching a deal on their own terms, and it's scheduled to be going down April 12th. And this wasn't the initial plan that Top Rank had laid out for Vasyl Lomachenko. The initial plan was that he was supposed to be participating in a unification fight with the winner of the Isa Chaniev versus Richard Kamny fight. The winner of that fight was crowned the IBF champion, the winner being Richard Kamny. But after Kamny sustained an injury, they had to look elsewhere. They had to see what else was out there for them, in which case, Anthony Crolla, his mandatory challenger, that fight was ordered back in January. So as far as precedence, all the precedence is there for this fight to happen, in spite of how unimpressive some people might feel Anthony Crolla is. These are just my thoughts. Vasyl Lomachenko's a champion. He's got 2 world titles, and those 2 world titles come with mandatory challengers attached to them. This is just that kind of a situation. It's causality. At the end of the day, it does read a lot like a keep busy fight because, well, Anthony Crolla does not seem to be on the level of a Vasyl Lomachenko, and that's all well and good. But this is his mandatory challenger. He does have a legitimate claim for a title shot, so it is what it is. He's got to give it to him. The WBA ordered it, and what's he supposed to do? Hand over his belt because you don't have a high opinion of Anthony Crolla? I mean, at least Vasyl Lomachenko is fighting fighters from his own fucking weight class. That's more than we see Gervonta Davis doing. That's more than we see Errol Spence doing. At least he's fighting fighters from his own fucking weight class, and they ordered him to fight the guy. This isn't the guy that he was supposed to be fighting, but this is how it all worked out. So I don't see any reason for the critics to take shots at Vasyl Lomachenko when he's just fulfilling his obligations as a champion. And I don't really understand the logic that most of Vasyl Lomachenko's critics practice anyway, when these same guys were exuberant to see Gervonta Davis fighting Abner Mares, a guy from 126, and that didn't materialize. And then they wanted to act excited about the Hugo Ruiz fight. You guys get excited watching Gervonta Davis fighting guys that aren't even in his weight class, but you're going to get mad at Vasyl Lomachenko for satisfying his mandatory challenger? Something is very wrong with your reasoning skills, with your logic. I'll tell you that I'm not excited about this fight. I don't think Anthony Crolla really poses any threat to Vasyl Lomachenko per se. I don't think that there's very much he can do to make things hard for Vasyl Lomachenko, but at the end of the day, that's just my opinion on the fighter. The reality of it is, Vasyl Lomachenko is being ordered to fight this guy, and it's either he's going to fight him or he's going to give him his belt, and I see no reason for Vasyl Lomachenko to go as far as giving his belt away to a guy he can easily beat. So I've got no complaints about the fight. I might not be excited about it, I might not have any illusions about it, but I've got no complaints about it either. When you're a champion, this is what happens. It comes with the territory, and you would do wise to be mindful of anybody that is criticizing this fight, because odds are, anybody who's stupid enough to criticize Vasyl Lomachenko satisfying a fucking mandatory,
don't know shit about boxing.
It's likely that a person like that doesn't have the hierarchy of thought to understand this sport in the first place. It seems that a lot of people are just playing favorites. A lot of people that want to be, critics, a lot of people that want to pretend to be members of the media, a lot of people that want to pretend to be journalists, even though they lack journalistic integrity. There's nothing to criticize here. No, it's not the biggest fight Vasyl Lomachenko can be involved in, but you do the math. If Richard Comey is injured,
IBF champion.
That's one champion. That's the IBF champion. If the IBF champion is injured, and the WBC champion is up there on a suicide mission trying to fight Errol Spence,
who's left?
Vasyl Lomachenko's got to keep busy with somebody. So who do you recommend he fight? Who do you recommend he fight when...
Champs are busy.
The only guy you seem to be interested in is Gervonta Davis, but Gervonta Davis's handlers aren't even in any hurry to make that fight. So who the fuck do you want Vasyl Lomachenko to fight so you can stop crying and acting like a little bitch? Name somebody, please. I tell you, it kills me how you got these quote-unquote members of the media, quote-unquote journalists, guys that are supposed to be reporting the news. It kills me how these guys are over the moon whenever Gervonta Davis picks his latest cherry, but somehow they conjure up the energy to get mad that Vasyl Lomachenko's basically doing his job as a champion. And the whole time they're levying criticisms towards Vasyl Lomachenko, I defy you to tell me, okay, who do you want him to fight then? If both the champions are out of the picture because Mikey's busy with Spence and Richard's, he's busy recuperating, then who the fuck do you want him to fight? Who? Gervonta Davis? Davis don't want to fight him, remember? That's not what Floyd and them want for Davis right now. So who the fuck do you want him to fight? And if you can't name anybody, then what the fuck are you complaining about? I'll tell you, it's more of the same from those quote-unquote members of the media, if that's what you want to call them. I call them a bunch of dick-rotten shills for the PBC, but all the same, it's more of the same from those guys. And finally, I saw this a couple of days ago, didn't get the chance to react to it, but apparently, Billy Joe Saunders versus Shavkat Sufi set for vacant WBO 168-pound title on April 13th. It appears that Billy Joe Saunders is going to be moving up in weight and contending for the world title, the version of the world title that Gilberto Ramirez used to hold. Apparently, Gilberto Ramirez, he means business. He means to go up to light heavyweight. And as a result of that, the title that he used to hold at super middleweight is now vacant. Thus, Billy Joe Saunders is about to fight for it. Now, I'm going to be completely honest when I say that from where I'm sitting, it really does look like Billy Joe Saunders is opting to take the path of least resistance. Here's why. Back in January, the WBO was affording him the opportunity to win back his title from Demetrius Andrade. They actually ordered that fight. So it's not like Billy didn't have a title opportunity already. He did. It's just that it's against Demetrius Andrade, a guy who's a more interesting opponent than this Shavkat Sufi guy. I mean, this is a largely unheralded contender.
Who is he?
Who, you look at his resume, you look for the substance, and it's simply not there. In which case, when you compare both of those opponents, you ask yourself a question. Which one of these two guys makes for a more interesting fight? Which one of these two guys is the better fighter comparatively? And I think unanimously, you'll find that most people will tell you Demetrius Andrade is the better fighter. If we're going to compare Andrade to Shavkat Sufi, Demetrius Andrade would be the better fighter. It is the more interesting fight. And in a lot of ways, Demetrius and Billy got unfinished business. Demetrius wound up with your belt because you tested positive for some kind of substance. Massachusetts wasn't hearing it. You got yourself stripped. But you actually had the opportunity to win that belt back. And rather than doing that, you've chosen to go up there to 168 to fight for a vacant title against an unheralded contender. A guy nobody's ever heard of, is virtually unknown in the world scene, thus his elitism, if there is any, is unknown
and non-existent
to everyone. And, Billy going up to 168, he mentioned how Caleb Smith is up there, the winner of DeGale versus Eubank is up there.
So what?
And he's not lying that those guys are up there, that those fights are possibilities, but
there's no guarantees you fight them.
They seem like empty promises. In spite of Billy Joe Saunders mentioning those names, guys that could be in his crosshairs, it all just comes off as empty promises. Look, Billy Joe Saunders is a talented fighter. Anybody who's seen him at his best knows that this guy is a very polished boxer. Very good defensive prowess, very good counterpunching, good lateral movement, what have you. This is a crafty southpaw if you've ever seen a crafty southpaw. But those things in mind, he leaves the middleweight division, and he leaves the fans with a feeling of unfinished business, that you got all kinds of unfinished business at 160 pounds. There are any variety of people that you didn't fight. There are any variety of opportunities that you didn't take. And you leaving the weight class now to fight this guy for what is a vacant title.
Just saying.
It gives off the impression that you're just looking for the path of least resistance and biding your time until something rolls around. And that may backfire because so far, while Billy Joe Saunders might have won the WBO title at middleweight in impressive fashion against Andy Lee, solid fighter. While he might have done that, that was a very long time ago. Now, very recently, Billy Joe Saunders won favor amongst the fans by outboxing David Lemieux, but okay. In between the time that you fought Andy Lee, up until the point you fought David Lemieux, what were you doing? And after that, you know, what happened after that? In other words, Saunders is a talented fighter. I don't take that away from him. But his body of work in the middleweight division is now, in hindsight, a bit unimpressive because you're leaving behind all this unfinished business to go contend for a title that nobody's even holding when you had the opportunity to fight a champion. And you may find it lonely at super middleweight because, you know, those guys you're talking about, there's no guarantees that they're going to waste any time on you.
They might not.
I mean, it would be nice. We can always hold out hope, but this is the sport of boxing, ladies and gentlemen.
No guarantees.
So the most I can say as far as this move and how I interpret it, I'm not happy about it. I think that Billy's choosing to go the easy route. That's what I think. That's what I see. And I'm not quite sure that his career is going to, you know, develop into something more at super middleweight when there were so many opportunities at middleweight that he didn't capitalize on. So what's going to change now that you're at super middleweight? You might end up doing the same thing at super middleweight that you did at middleweight. You never fought Golovkin, you never fought Daniel Jacobs, and you never fought Demetrius Andrade. So we're supposed to believe that you're going to fight the who's who of 168 when you couldn't even fight the who's who of 160? I'm not sure about that. So my feeling is there's a lot of unfinished business that he leaves behind, and that's not very encouraging when you're starting off in a new weight class, because you're probably going to do the same fucking thing. Rewind the clocks on Billy Joe Saunders' reign as WBO middleweight champion. Rewind the clocks. While he was champion, he actually had the opportunity to fight Daniel Jacobs. He had the opportunity to fight Gennady Golovkin, who was actively pursuing him.
Yes.
And as WBO champion, he had the opportunity to defend that crown against Demetrius Andrade. But a snafu, a mishap, or just getting caught red-handed, however you want to characterize it, Billy Joe Saunders ends up getting stripped, Andrade ends up with your belt. But it doesn't stop there. The opportunities don't stop there, because the WBO very recently gave you an opportunity to win that belt back. And rather than doing that, you left the weight class altogether. This has been the reign of Billy Joe Saunders, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not going to tell you that he doesn't have any good victories. He gave Chris Eubank Jr. his first professional loss. He beat Andy Lee in impressive fashion. And he outboxed David Lemieux, who some people thought was going to knock him out. I'm not telling you that Billy didn't fight anybody. I'm saying that
leaving now,
these moments where Billy is impressing people, they are far and few. He goes from impressing people to pissing people off. And now that he's leaving middleweight, all I'm left thinking is there was a lot of unfinished business there. There were a lot of fights that could have happened and should have happened, but didn't. And now you're fighting Joe fucking Schmo for a vacant belt? I'm sorry that I'm not impressed, but I'm not.